the Everything But Politics podcast.
All right. We're live. Welcome back to the 116th edition of the Everything But Politics podcast. Today's guest is a man my brothers and I have admired for a very, very long time. And it is our pleasure to finally be welcoming him to our show. Founder and CEO of rEvolution, John Rowady. John, thank you for coming on our show, man. It's great to be with you.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure. 116.
Yeah, let's have some fun.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, it's been
a lot of interviewing.
It's been a great joy. We've got to meet some incredible people, and now happy to add you to this roster. So, John, why don't we start for our listeners? Why don't you give them a little background into who you are and what exactly it is you've done these last 23, 24 years?
That's a long journey, but if we want to go way back, I grew up in Detroit, and I grew up a huge sports fan and an athlete. Family in Detroit, auto business, and when I went to college in Indiana, and I left Michigan and went to Indiana with my brothers at home. I have three brothers, and my family. I got involved in the business school and really studied a lot of business and remained a sports fan. And coming out of Indiana, I was recruited by a lot of companies. I was the president of my fraternity, and you had the opportunity to take on a lot of interviews. And there was a company that interviewed me, an industrial company called PPG. And PPG, they make all the glass for cars and for buildings and all the paint that you see on cars. I mean, they're a huge company. They're based out of Pittsburgh. So I take this job. I leave Bloomington in Indiana. I don't go back to Michigan, and I move to Pittsburgh. And in Pittsburgh, I'm learning about chemicals and glass and paint. And I decided I wanted to be one of their sales territory reps. And so they're like, hey, you're a Midwestern guy. We want you to go and take care of the Midwest and go and sell for us. And you can go to all the different companies that are around the Midwest. And that was everything from Michigan to Chicago and up into Wisconsin, down into Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana. I'm like, yeah, these are my stomping ground. One of the things that I really loved about that job is that I could take my clients to special sporting events. And one event in particular, being a guy from Detroit and growing up around racing, my dad, he was an auto engineer. He was part of a team that built the original airbags, the cruise control system. So when I was growing up, he would take me to all the racing in Detroit and all the car places in Detroit and all the hockey games and all those types of things. So when I went to PPG, they had a title sponsorship to the IndyCar World Series. It was called the PPG IndyCar World Series. And I was like, yeah, I know this because there's a race in Detroit. There's the Indy 500. There's a race up in Milwaukee. There's a race all over the place called the PPG IndyCar World Series. And as a salesperson in the region, I had a budget to go take my clients to these races. Now, these were just like show up at the races. And you guys know this because you've been to a lot of events. But this was like the insider stuff. This was like the best hospitality. This was like going on the track with the drivers of the cars, and they would put us on hot laps. And I just loved it. I love the way that it built relationships. So I started doing more deals at PPG. I'm 22, 23 years old. I'm selling all this stuff. I'm taking these clients to these races. I'm building relationships, and those started to form into big business relationships. So they moved me to Chicago. And in Chicago, one of my brothers moved to Chicago. When I went to Indiana, everybody was from Chicago. So they moved me to Chicago to run the whole territory. And as I was in Chicago running the whole territory, I had to work out of my house or my apartment in Lincoln Park. And I got to the point where I'm like, I want to be around more people. I want to do more things. I don't think I want to be around chemicals and glass and industrial stuff. So, and I love this sports piece. So my older brother and his girlfriend, they're like, hey, you know what? There's this sports production company in Chicago. And they do like the Bears show, and they do like an NCAA March Madness show, and they're looking for a young salesperson. Why don't you come meet with the owner? Why don't you come in interview? And I'm like, wow, that would be great. I mean, sports and business and sales, are you kidding me? And so I show up and I interview with this guy, and his name was Charlie Besser, and he owned this company called Intersport. And he was like a sports agent, production guy, entrepreneurial, a lawyer. I mean, he had the whole thing in him. And I'm joining this entrepreneurial firm. I go there and I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. I could be in sports. We talked and he said, you know what? I want to hire you. I want to hire you. I'm going to pay you very little, but I'm going to give you commission if you do deals and you do those things. And I left PPG after a couple of years, and my sports career started at a little company in Chicago called Intersport Television.
Wow. And then, so from there, did that entrepreneurial spirit start with rEvolution, or did it start at 22, 23 while selling?
Well, I would say that, you know, for me, when I was at college and I became president of fraternity, and I was in the business school, and I was, you know, working on different types of jobs and things like that when I would go home during the summers, that I started to get this passion for business and entrepreneurship and, you know, being able to be on my own, work on my own. And I wanted to make a lot of money and be really successful and be independent. So I think that with PPG, I was in a huge corporation. And so what triggered me was, wow, there's a lot of levels I have to go to actually be that executive at the top. I mean, it's a ton. This is going to be a long road. And I was a pretty impatient guy, competitive guy at a young age and those types of things. And so when I took the deal to start my first job and work for a small family company, I think learning how to sell and the pressures of selling, the grinding and the intensity and then doing deals, I think that a bigger part of me that was true in entrepreneurship started to really come out as a bigger part of my characteristic. And that lit the fire to where I haven't stopped since. I just haven't stopped since. And so that goes all the way back to where I was like maybe 24.
You make a funny point, John, about being impatient in your early 20s. How did you develop a sense of patience?
You know, I think a sense of patience. I learned more of a sense of patience when I started rEvolution in 2001. And because I was very impatient. And, you know, I think my wife, you know, when we were dating, she would always be like, honey, not acid, honey, not acid. And she was just such a different style than me. And I think with owning a business, I learned that, you know, sometimes the world has to come to you. Sometimes it's like a gear. Sometimes you need to know when to gear up, and sometimes you need to know when to gear back. And so I started winning and modifying on losing and winning more based on gaining. There's times to be patient and there's times to be impatient.
Absolutely. Well, and John, now the sports industry is way bigger than it was when you started in 2001. How difficult is it to start a sports company in 2024, 2025 compared to 2001? Do you think there's similarities?
Well, I mean, I've been fortunate, and you guys, your generation is still fortunate because we remain in the gold rush of sports marketing. you know,
Absolutely,
and it started probably back in the 70s and then into the 80s. And then with technology and modern media and modern marketing and the evolution of fandom and all the things that we're going through, it's been exponential in its transformation.
But
Even to the point where I think sport has changed the world completely for the better.
that's John, outside of just building a sports, not sports, but sports anything in 2025, outside to zoom out a little, how about building like a sexy business versus a non-sexy business? I mean, right? Because what are some of the main disparities you think there in terms of growing and scaling a business 2025 to 2030?
Well, I think it's fully open to building a sexy business today. It's just going to be different, and you're going to have to find different blue ocean. You know, like for example, some of the sexy businesses in sports that kind of grew up were in athlete representation. And so, and if you look at the very top of the heap, the biggest of the bigs that are out there, like the CAAs of the world and the IMGs of the world, and those kinds of agencies that you've heard of, I mean, they're moving the biggest athletes in the world with their big salaries and those types of things. And so that's been a sexy business, but that's changing now to where you have to be really brand oriented to build a sexy business because everybody's a brand. Everybody's their own brand. And you have to be able to build that. So like when I got together with Rich Paul, who he has LeBron's athlete agency, he came to me and said, we got to change the way the athlete business works to be sexier and transformative, more dynamic. So we have to have brand shops. We have to have the ability to have creative strategy, creative campaigning, so that we can communicate with the new and diverse audiences that are out there. And that's where I think the sexy businesses can totally be formed today and still grown and become dynamic.
Well, and John, your company primarily focuses on sports marketing. When you were first starting Revolution in 2001, was there ever a thought to be a sports agent?
Well, I started when I started in the business, I was in being growing up in the sales side
Yeah.
and the revenue side. So all my jobs before Revolution were either selling sports media to advertisers, selling sponsorship and representing big rights holders, leagues, teams, huge events, and finding sponsors, representing athletes, finding them sponsors. So that was a big side of my business. Now, what was the common piece in all that? The commonality was I was going out and I was working to get money out of brands and advertisers. And so when I started, the reason it's called Revolution, why I started Revolution is nobody had started an agency that in sports marketing that was just focused on representing the brands. And so for me to do that, I needed to have zero conflict of interest in representing athletes or representing rights, because how can I be a consultant to a brand if I'm also selling players
Yeah.
and you
Yeah,
understand?
if you're selling you can't just be selling your agents or your
Yeah,
clients.
can't sell my stuff. So that's why I went and I dedicated the brands, because I wanted to be closer where the money is too.
Yeah.
And you know, now there's a few players, and now the biggest of the bigs also have the brand side of the agency. But that's really why I switched over in 2001 and started Business Revolution, is I saw an opportunity where I could really help the brand spend their money better, spend it in the right areas, and also help them connect with the fans of those sports better. Because we knew, like in research performance, that if you show up with these audiences better and you're more authentic, today that's a normal term, they're gonna prefer your brand over some other brand that's not in the sport. And that's been proven. And so that's essentially what I wanted to do. And it's been a rewarding and lucrative business that has transformed and continues to change and transform. Still today, there isn't a dedicated brand side sports marketing agency, 100% dedicated to brands at our size in the marketplace.
Wow.
Well,
Uh,
Well, I was
Go
saying,
ahead,
Mick,
Ross.
you're also talking about like TV deals and brand deals. In terms of TV deals, do you think there's ever a moment where we see these NFL games and the college football games only on streaming services like Peacock, and we're just going to remove ourselves from cable?
100%. 100%. It's happening. And this year it happened faster than before. Like I was just in LA and I was at the MLS Cup. Okay. And they're streaming deals with Apple. And so they have Apple Plus, and they're going 100% into the paid wall area. And it's a concern for some of our sponsors, because we bring the big sponsors to the MLS, like Continental Tire. And so, but that is where the market is going. And it's our role to help our clients figure out what that means.
Yeah, and it was just announced today that YouTube TV is raising their prices from $72.99 a month to $82.99 a month starting in mid-January. I don't know if you saw that.
I did. One of the reasons, Merrick, that it is going to go up and it's going to be on this exponential formula scale is because they're in the rights holder guarantee game. So they're spending tons of money to gain these rights. Like when you talk about Prime and Thursday Night Football, and you talk about, DirecTV finally unseated for NFL Ticket, and NFL Ticket goes to YouTube. They're paying massive rights for these. And so the incremental costs are going to obviously be pushed on to the consumer.
Nice. Well, John, I want to take a step back to that job at, I think you said 25 with Intersport in Chicago. I know shortly after that, you went back to university and got your MBA. What told you that was a good idea for you in your career as you wanted to do something significant?
I was when I left Intersport after a few years. I left Intersport and I was picked up by a much bigger TV company in the sports business called Raycom Sports. And they produce like Big Ten, ACC, SEC, college basketball, college football, the live games, the regional games, the live games in ESPN. And when I moved, that was my second job in sports. I tripled the amount of money I was being paid, which was still not a lot, but I was moving up in the world, could afford my car and the whole thing. But now I'm selling much bigger sports, much bigger live events. And the point being is, as I sat back, as I'm moving up, and I'm like, okay, if I just stay a sales guy, I'm going to be 50 years old down the road and I'm going to be a sales guy. But if I'm going to really learn about business and maybe own my own business someday, or at least be able to move up into the C-suite of these sports companies, I'm going to have to move from sales eventually into management, executive management, maybe move to New York where a lot of it is, or move to LA. I need to get my MBA. And so that was kind of what kicked me off. And when I go back to like how I am and my impatience and those types of things, I started to realize that I'm worried about 10 chess moves down the road. My mind is 10, like I can't even help it. It's just 10 chess moves down the road. And so when I would sit in my current position, I really felt like I'm going to get stuck. And so I went and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go get my MBA. And I actually did my MBA at night at Loyola. I was working and I did my MBA at night. There were a lot of other business people that were in there, and I learned a heck of a lot when I got my MBA. And funny enough, Merrick, I mean, when I started my business, it was amazing between the street knowledge that I learned from all my bosses, the sales acumen that I had learned to go do deals, how to do deals in different phases, some of the management stuff I've done, plus the finance and operational acumen. It really came in handy when I started a business.
And so you graduate from your MBA program, and then so what age was that? How old were you?
I graduated from my MBA program at 27.
Did you continue with Raycom for a little after?
I continued with Raycom for almost up until I graduated. And then my boss at the time was picked up by Fox Sports. So Fox was spending a ton of money in building out their whole sports production area and those types of things. And then when he left, the big boss out of New York said, "Hey, you need to move to Charlotte, okay, where our big production center is. And that's where we want to have management. We want you to be manager." I was pretty young to be, move into like a vice president of sales type of level. And I was, about ready. I was a couple years from getting married, but I was like dating my soon to be wife and those types of things. And I'm like, we're not going to Charlotte. And once I signal we're not going to Charlotte, then pretty much my job there is over and I'm sitting in Chicago. Fox Sports comes calling and saying we need a VP of ad sales out of Chicago. And I take the VP of ad sales job at Fox Sports. And now I move into selling the NFL, the NHL, Major League Baseball, you name it, at the Fox network level. And, I'm 27 years old.
That's amazing.
Well, and John, everything you say, like all the deals that you learned prior to Revolution seems like shaped the success of Revolution because you've seen it before being in the industry. Would you advise those who are getting out of college and want to just start their own company to work for some bigger, major companies prior to just going out on a limb and opening their own sports company?
Yeah, but that's a really good question because I think everybody fits within a size and a shape of an organization. And, when I was coming up, my generation, it was in your 20s. The average of jobs you were going to have in your 20s was somewhere around 3 or 4 jobs. Today it's totally different. And we can talk about that. You guys know, just being in the generation, it's totally different. But being a Gen Xer, we were like the renegade, forgotten generation. So we were climbers. So let's say 4 jobs. I was at a family business, boutique here in Chicago. I was in a much larger mid-size kind of family independent business in Raycom that was with a family out of Charlotte, but did much bigger things. And then I go to Fox Sports, which was a huge corporation. PPG was a huge corporation. I didn't stay at Fox Sports very long. I was picked up by an international agency called ISL Worldwide, who did all the rights to World Cup Soccer, FIFA, and the Olympic Games. And they were based in Switzerland. And they were run by the Adidas or Adidas shoe family. They had built a marketing arm called ISL. And they were a family business, about 500 people. And it was international and it was soccer. I loved soccer growing up. My point being was I went to a mid-size family, hotshot business, and that's ultimately what I really loved. So it's a long way of answering. Like I went through the path. I invested the time in all these different companies. And ultimately, by not staying at Fox Sports, it wasn't because it wasn't a great company. It wasn't for me because I almost immediately within a year was recruited and left to go to a 500-person agency, which would have been the size of like a Raycom And that's where I stayed at Raycom a long time. I ended up staying at ISL a long time. And so for me, I like being in a company that had resources, but that I had the ability to move in different levels all the way up to executives very quickly and very easily. I didn't like being in massive layered organizations, and I didn't like being in too small of organizations that weren't well resourced or didn't have enough clout. So that's ultimately where I found that I fit the best.
So a lot of trial and error.
It's trial and error. You got to invest in the time. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
not going to just in this business or any sales business or any relationship making business, you're going to have to trial and error.
So, you experience all these jobs in these different positions, and then you understand how the sports business works. They're representing athletes, but not brands. At what point in your life did the light bulb go off and you said there's a real opportunity to do something here?
Um, well, let's see. I was maybe about 30 and I was still at ISL. ISL was having financial problems. The family had changed in their ownership, and I love the company, and I was now running North and South America for them. Like I had moved like really quickly to be the managing director of North and South America. The headquarters were out of Connecticut. We had just in the US alone, we had about 100 employees and a bunch of rights. So my point that I got to is that I started consolidating deals and doing deal making. As a matter of fact, one of the deals that I was working on was with Sean McManus and Les Moonves because I had our agency make a bid for the NCAA March Madness rights. And so I'm working with CBS because they have the TV rights and we're going to do the marketing rights. ISL goes out of business in May of 2001. And for the first time in my life, I'm out of a job. I'm out of a job. I just had my first daughter. We had a house in Michigan and we're doing these types of things. And so, look, pressure and instincts really change at that point in time. And so I'm interviewing for jobs. And in the process of looking and interviewing for jobs, I'm writing a white paper about how to build the next great sports marketing agency because I had the time. And it kept me busy because I'm impatient and I didn't want to wait around for interviews. And I'm going to New York for interviews. And, it was a very surreal experience for me because I've never been out of job and I was doing the jobs that 40 and 50-year-olds were having. So when I was out of a job and I'm 31 and I'm interviewing guys and gals in the business that are like late 30s and 40s and they're going, how much do you make? They didn't really want me around after that. I was like on the sideline and they didn't want me around. Not because I didn't have a good reputation. I was just a young guy, like moving up through the system pretty quickly. And so it's interesting that the dynamics of the marketplace and what happens and where you go. And I'm writing a white paper and all of a sudden I'm like, do you want to move to New York or do you want to go back to Chicago? And that's kind of how it happened. We went back to Chicago. We were living in grandma's basement. I was looking for a job in Chicago. I come home. A buddy of mine said, hey, why don't you start your own business? I'll give you some office space. I'm like, really? And I go, well, let me show you my white paper. He goes, yeah, I'll give you some office space. I'll give you a little bit of investment. I have a production business. I think it could be really cool. And in September of 2001, end of September, I started rEvolution.
What a time.
Yeah.
September 2001.
Yeah, I have a big story in there, a big story. because on September 11th, I'm living in Detroit. I don't have a job yet, and I have a bunch of interviews in New York.
Whoa.
And I get on a plane. I'm supposed to get on at 6 a.m., get on a plane, get to New York, have these interviews. And for whatever reason, I missed the plane and I missed the flight. And I get on the next plane and we're up in the air and we're heading into New York. We're starting to land in New York, and the captain comes over and said, "Hey, you know what? We can't land. We gotta in New York. We gotta land right away." So we land in Cleveland. And at the time, you didn't have like the cell phones you have today. You have like flip phones and stuff like this. I mean, there was no iPhone even then. So I land and I call my wife and I go, "Hey, I landed in Cleveland. Something's going on." And she's like crying on the phone. She's like, "I'm watching these planes, go into the trade center and you're supposed to be in New York."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Really?" I started hearing this chatter and I'm like, "Hey, I'm in Cleveland. I'm not in New York. They shut down Cleveland Airport and I'm going to hitchhike home from Cleveland." And so I hitchhike home from Cleveland, listening to what happened on 9/11. I get home. I get in there with my wife at home. She's like, I don't understand what happened. And I said, "You know what? We're not going to New York. We're going to Chicago." And that's when the whole thing changed. And we went to Chicago. And within a few weeks, I'm like, "You know what? What do you think about me starting a business?"
It's crazy how moments like that change the
Yeah.
entire trajectory of what could have been.
Yeah, what could have
Living in New
been.
York for 30 years. Yeah.
Or on the other hand, is your story written and you just got to go figure it out?
So
Yeah.
cool. Wait, so
No?
okay, so you put the pen to paper, and that's now it's becoming a reality. From day one, what were the steps you ensured that you took where you saw progress being made every single day?
Well, I got a lot of advice. I had, a core group of people that were in my camp, the family and friends. And I started to socialize what I was doing. And I went to a lot of my mentors that were at other big sports agencies. And I started showing them what I was going to be doing to get their advice. And I think that was really good because I got a lot of different opinions about my white paper and what I was doing. My buddy in Chicago, who had a corporate production agency, he lent a lot of insight because he had built his own business. He and I were buddies when we grew up in Lincoln Park in our 20s, and I watched him build his own business. So when I went to go see him, he was able to give me a lot of advice. So I used a lot of mentoring, and I really studied how he and others were building their own business to make sure that I could get it right. And I'll tell you what, I mean, a lot of the things that I had to do had nothing to do with sports. It had everything to do with legal entities, and it had everything to do with setting up healthcare and benefits and payroll systems and, you name it, that all businesses are going to need. I was very focused on the kind of business that I wanted to create. So I think focus for me and not being distracted and doing other things was really important. So if you look at my white paper from then and what the business is today, very similar to the white paper because I was so focused on getting this business plan right.
Well, John, another thing that is often talked about in winning is the team. And you've talked about in other interviews that you still have the same partners you started with. How important is that strong team in building not only just the team aspect, but the chemistry behind it, where you're not just work buddies, but you're also friends and they can count on you and you can count on them?
Culture is a huge part of these businesses, and instilling culture is like taking a tree and rooting it in and helping it grow. I mean, it takes time. So my partners were really important. As a matter of fact, my one partner I brought back from ESPN, he's still with me today, almost 23 years. And my other partner who runs our global research group. He's still with me today. And I think those are some of the most important aspects. My head of creative, he came over in an acquisition from a youth and action sports agency in 2009. He's still with me today. And I think that really builds this team and family type of culture, because you want to be able to have people, and you want to be able to have a structure in which you're hiring more and more people, and they're buying into, they're here because of your values, your system of play, your culture. And that, as you scale, is what allows for a lot of success. So I'm a huge believer in values and a culture system.
Is it possible to be a successful entrepreneur without being skillful in sales?
Yeah, I think you can be a successful and skillful entrepreneur if you know how to give up enough ego to be able to bring on core people that you're going to need to do the things that you're not as good doing. So you could be a whiz at finance and be a great, engineer, and be a great owner and entrepreneur, but you also have to have like the talent to be able to pick somebody who's going to help you generate revenue, and somebody who's going to help you operate the revenue when it comes in. So, those types of construct. And so you can see that all over the industry. I mean, there's like wizard tech guys that are out there that are making billion dollar businesses almost overnight, and they have those types of talents. They're visionaries, they're innovators, and sometimes it's just in the product and the idea that sells itself. You just need to put it together and execute. So yes, totally possible. You do not need to be an entrepreneur that's a whiz at sales. You need to definitely understand how to execute and how to make money.
So you mentioned impatience in your 20s. How about ego? And if so, what was the moment that humbled you to let go of that ego?
Well, I think, you know, success in doing it yourself pretty much calms the ego. I think it's where appreciation and humbleness comes from, is that you found your purpose and it's providing value, and that is a reflection on you. And so it affords you a better ability to be humble and appreciative, because your ego moves into the background. Because what do you need? What do you need to do? Now, some people use ego to their advantage. It may not be people that you want to be around, but it doesn't mean they're not successful. In my business, it's full of sharks. It's full of egos. But I think you got to be confident, and you got to have a bit of a swagger, and you have to have bravery. I think when you talk about bravery, it's your foundation of how you face fear. And that's through being brave and being able to go for it. And I think all of those are components of how your ego is set up.
Yeah, I would imagine in that world of yours, you get people that, but like you said, it's not a bad thing. It could be, but in a lot of cases, it's a winner
Motivator.
trait.
Yeah, because if ego is something that blinds you to everything around, and you're willing to compromise your standards because you're feeding your ego and you're making a bunch of money and stuff like that, it's going to catch up to you someday.
Well,
And so I think there's a balancing act that goes on. As you get bigger in these businesses, you're dealing with different levels of some pretty brutal egos and, tough people that are out there in the world of sports.
well, and John, speaking of like when you do have brand deals that you're closing and working on structuring a deal, how, like on average, how long is the back and forth of communicating before pen goes to paper and you actually do close a deal?
Closing a big deal, or whale hunting, as I call it, is an art.
Whale hunted, I like that.
It's an art. Now, that's what I love. You know, like I'm not going to call on 100 people. I'm going to call on 10 and have a high close rate, and I want to do big deals. Not everybody is built to do big deals. And in big deals, I mean, it could take you a year, it could take you longer. I mean, you got to be able to maneuver, an entire episodic, sequence of different things and build instincts on, okay, this is going to happen here, or this person's going to do this. I mean, it's a lot of work. And the hardest part about deal making and big deal making is the last 3 feet. Because now you're dealing with signing checks and signing contracts and committing $100 million to something. And that's a big deal. I'm working for corporate executives and I'm their agent, moving them through the selection and negotiating components of a big F1 deal, World Cup deal, an NFL deal, a Ryder Cup deal, and I have team members with me on my team, from research and analytics to business strategy to legal and negotiators. I mean, I definitely have a team that you have to build and actually close these big deals. But that is a big part of being successful in this business, because doing big deals feeds all the rest of the business. The budgets that come with big deals, are much different than, if you're doing small deals and other things. And so I've always wanted to reach big, and always wanted to do big deals and spend my time helping big clients do, huge things that will transform their business.
John, how is your definition of a big deal changed since 2001 to now?
I mean, when we were doing like a Tostitos deal for the first big, Fiesta Bowl, I mean, those were maybe $20 million deals. And now today, you're doing 80, 100, $150 million types of commitments. It's pretty sizable. There's still a lot of asset that's out there. I mean, one of the beautiful things about today is that there's always new sports. There's always new sports forming. Many of the big leagues are creating new IP, like going to NFL, going to do international games. AEG or Fox Sports creating, the Crown as a college basketball NIL tournament. So there's always a lot of what we call assets that are out there that you can get for different levels.
Well, and John, something Ethan and I were actually talking about yesterday, because it was on ESPN. We're seeing, you see so many WNBA ads now. And before Caitlin Clark, no one even showed women's basketball. So that's a whole other category that is it's being pushed down the content of all of us now. Like a sport like pickleball, do you see that becoming like a WNBA, where it gets more mainstream on ESPN and some of the big channels?
Well, as it relates to women's sports, the WNBA has been they've been on a long track. I mean, I was selling women's sports years ago, and now everybody's like, hey, we got to sell more women's sports. ESPN just put up a $200 million media rights deal. That's the biggest deal ever for the WNBA and for other women's sports. So that's why I think it's well on its way. Caitlin Clark just on Time Magazine Women of the Year. So I think that's really good. When you look at pickleball, it's one of those sports that is, it's going to be hot for a while, and then it's not going to be hot.
John, I have a question for you, John, as a businessman, about the WNBA. So if I'm correct, the WNBA has not been profitable in a very long time. How is that sustainable, like, for the league or anyone involved in that? As a businessman, what would you do?
Well, the WNBA was started a long time ago now. I guess in relative terms of the NBA, it wasn't that long ago, but David Stern was like, we got to have a women's game. And he goes in the ownership meetings and he's like, all you guys are going to own WNBA teams. So it was a full-on mandate. And while maybe the league has lost money over time and, the value of those franchises have gone up substantially, even though, they're a lot of them aren't cash flowing per se, but the level of backers and the commitment to backing is never going to fail because the mandate is that, and you have NBA men's team owners that own these teams, or there's new owners that have come in to buy these teams. So it's a mandate that's going to continue to flourish. And I think they're well on their way. That doesn't mean they're going to be overly profitable, but I think when they are now seeing the selling of these franchises to new owners, there's a whole new pool of owners that are out there. There's a younger pool of people that want to own these teams. There's plenty of money that's out there in the younger generation that want to own these teams. Women's sports is hot. So I think it's well on its way.
And so, given where you stand in this world, are you more bullish on teams like that are superstar driven leagues like the NBA, WNBA, or more so team oriented teams, I guess? So like NFL and things of that nature.
MLB.
Yeah.
I think it's both because when you look at Formula One, I mean, there's only 10 teams. They're going to go to an Andretti team. It's going to be an 11. Finally, it's going to happen. So those are team-owned sports, somewhat different than, let's say, owning an NFL team or a Premier League team, if that's what you're asking. Or if you look at golf, and now it looks like there will be a LIV PGA deal that's going to be force mandated, and PIF is going to put $1.5 billion into the PGA. So I think you could see a super league in golf that you won't see anywhere else. But I think that when you talk about the NFL and you look at the valuations in the NFL and the changeover of those types of things, if you have the stack of cash to buy into an NFL team, you're going to make a hell of a lot of money.
Well, the reason I ask is because, the NFL, it doesn't really matter who's playing or who's on the team. People are going to watch regardless.
Yeah.
But NBA, for like the finals, for example, the ratings have gone down, I think, in the last decade by quite a bit because there's no like superstars. There's no Kobe. There's no LeBron. That's why I'm curious as to, a team-driven league where people watch regardless, or a superstar-driven league where, LeBron's got to play, but even he's taking time off right now. So there's really not a balance.
But I think, okay, back to that point on the NBA, maybe, the television ratings are off domestically, let's call it domestically in the US, but it's a superstar league and there's superstars that are coveted throughout the world and even China. So, I mean, even more so than the NFL, which internationally wouldn't be necessarily a superstar league, except for the younger generation of internationals, but more team value that's coming over, like when the Bears and the Patriots first started going to London. So I would look at it as you have different levels of maturity in different regions of the world with different types of sports. I think basketball is the most transferable anywhere throughout the world until soccer can make a real value play and a competitive play amongst the world's competition in the US.
And how beneficial or impactful is that World Cup going to be here?
Well, it's huge because it hasn't been there since the 90s, and it's going to be the largest World Cup ever. It'll be the largest sporting event ever in the world, and FIFA is going to be running it for the first time also across, Mexico, Canada, and the US in the best, most high-tech stadiums built in the world. So it is like a huge moment for the US and for global soccer here for 2026.
And John, how much of a slap in the face is it that the city of Chicago did not get a game?
Well, I sit on the Chicago Sports Commission, but I used to work in Switzerland with FIFA and know it. Chicago, had their reasons, and one of the reasons is that an international contract from FIFA shows up and comes into a pretty confident and oriented Chicago group of decision makers and say, you got to guarantee X, Y, and Z of millions, maybe billions of dollars. And so from a practical situation, Chicago's like, you're not going to tell us what to do. Forget about this. From my perspective and where I've come from, and because of so many other cities found a way to bid on it and actually get those, and Chicago being one of the original cities that the last World Cup played in Soldiers Field, that I'm always in a debate, a good debate with my counterparts on the city and those types of things, that in hindsight, it would have been awesome if Chicago had part of the World Cup.
Absolutely. Well, and John, I want to talk a little bit about PJ and LIV. You talked about it seems inevitable they're going to be joining forces. This week on social media, there were a lot of rumors that we would see a PGA LIV like Ryder Cup tournament format where they play against each other. Is that something that you could see happening?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know. Can't tell you the specifics of it, but I can totally see that happening. And I think that in modern golf fandom, of which I'm a part of, and I know you guys are a
Yep.
part of, we appreciate the team aspect of golf.
Absolutely. I think that
So,
would be a lot of fun to see the
yeah.
LIV guys going up against the PGA players.
Yeah, I think in LIV's in their format being like this fun, loud experience, I think that has its place somewhere, but I don't think that total format is the professionalized edge that we want to see with the best players in the world. So I think that there's some modification of what LIV's doing in a team format and what the PGA and the Ryder Cup kind of experience do to make it, a much more intense, a much more valuable team experience.
And something else that people haven't really been discussing is this month you have the Capital One match. You have Scotty and Rory versus Bryson and Brooks. So that's like the beginning of the intersection, in my opinion.
It is, and I think the match in those specialty pieces, that type of new IP, we call it like new asset IP, that's really popular. So Capital One, they're a client of ours, and we do work with them around college sports, and they have a lot of different groups that work with them because they're so huge. But Capital One, during the timing of that, with the right players and influencers, they want to sponsor that. And so I think those are the types of events that also people really like the night match that they did, seeing your favorite players go up against each other, having them, talk openly and jaw on the course. So fandom wants to get closer and closer to their favorite athletes and their favorite sports. And that's from social media to content to learning about them. I don't think that's going to change because that's the way you want to consume sports now. And that's the way the next generation is going to want to consume sports.
John, for someone that works so closely with all these major brands, when did a lot of these brands become less resistant towards working with LIV?
Well, technically right now they haven't become less resistant. There's still a huge challenge to bring big sponsors into LIV. I think, and partially because the PGA Tour is so powerful and so big, and also the network deals that are out there that advertisers and sponsors that love golf are very concerned about the backlash because of the controversy in the whole thing. And it's been extremely difficult to get sponsors that are over there. Only until they come together and find a way to come together. And if LIV as a brand continues and they come together and it's not controversial, then I think you'll see a lot more sponsorship and advertisement go their way. But right now, they're burning billions every year, and they didn't anticipate to burn billions every year.
With that said, that kind of states or claims that CW made a huge move in sponsoring LIV and putting their product on their network.
Well, CW was bought out and have new ownership, and they've had a really strong strategy because if you see NCW, they're picking up more traditional sports as well. So I think and it's going to help their valuation and help their advertiser base as they grow. So I think when you go on a network with something like LIV, they're able to programmatic ads into those spaces to where you're not actually going to the advertiser saying, hey, you want to be in LIV Golf. They're just running day parts, programmatic day parts of advertising to make sure that they're hitting certain demographics and people demographics. But I think that for CW, that was somewhat not relevant with LIV and now building out a whole sports platform as part of their programming is going to help them become even more relevant.
Well, and then keeping that relevance as streaming becomes more dominating.
Correct.
Yeah.
And streaming is going to be 100% dominant. So if you look at like ESPN, I mean, ESPN Plus, I mean, they're just preparing the day to where the actual, traditional broadcast center is going to be shut down. They're migrating as fast as they can, everybody over to ESPN Plus, and pretty soon SportsCenter and everything will only be on ESPN Plus and their streaming service. Now you do have 20 or 25% of your legacy audiences, that are like the traditional generations, like my generation and some millennials, but also when you get into baby boomers that are older than me, it's hard, they're just struggling to even move to the platform until they have to. And that's why it hasn't happened faster. But within the next couple of years, ESPN as an example will just be on ESPN Plus, the whole thing.
It's so interesting because it's so difficult to sometimes get the streaming on the TV. You gotta do you need 7 or 8 different logins just to watch a sports game.
Not a good experience.
No, it's not. Especially working at Buffalo's at a restaurant, to change from TV to TV, and then a Peacock only lets you have three TVs can only be on one account.
Yeah.
It causes some issues in the restaurant industry for sure.
So think if I'm an advertiser or a sponsor and I'm on the NFL, okay, and CBS and Fox are running the same day part, different games, different leagues. So if I want to flip to games and I'm an advertiser, I know my demographic, let's say NFL fan, I'm flipping to games. They're going to run advertising in both games so that they can continue to capture the migration of their audiences between the two games. Well, you're on YouTube, for ticket.
Yep.
I mean, you can't move between games fast enough to actually capture it. So it's a real challenge. It'll eventually work its way out. Technology and the will to be successful in sports business and those types of things, it will eventually work its way out so that the migration experience and the ability to move around channels will come back. But right now, I don't love it.
No, me neither.
And you guys can't love it.
You can imagine how Tutu feels.
Yeah. I mean, it was working just fine. I mean, I'm on an NFL game and there's a golf tournament that's on, and I'm gonna go and I want to watch my curling match, and a little bit of whatever, and I want to flip around, and I think that is they know that that's missing right now.
John, I have a question back kind of like towards the World Cup. This is a comparable though. What's going to have a greater economic impact on the United States, the World Cup or the 2028 Olympics?
I think that the World Cup will have a bigger impact because so many stadiums and so much travel, and then the size and the length of the tournament. Absolutely. When you're talking about the Olympics, that will be 2 weeks, two-ish weeks, and then you're talking about 5 weeks for the World Cup in 3 different countries and multiple areas in stadiums. Yeah, I think the economic impact for the World Cup will be a bit larger than the Olympics.
Well, when you say a bit, I actually didn't piece that together, the timing of it. And like you said, the Olympics is just Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And the other World Cup, you get three countries. So with that said, is that like 2-3x of what the Olympics will do?
It's going to be, it depends on how each state and each country, like what we do in Chicago, or when I work down in Indianapolis in the sports areas in the municipalities, we hire research firms to study economic impact. So depending on how those studies go and the economic impact, it could be 3 or 4 times the economic impact of the Olympics.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
John, so a lot of craziness right now in the world of Bitcoin and Web3. Do you see a future where Revolution accepts Bitcoin as a form of payment?
Yeah, I do. I think that as it becomes a little bit more, I think we're going to move into the era of the next 4 years where there's going to be a focus on stability and backing, because I think a lot of people just don't really understand truly what it is. I think it's okay to buy things with it, but are you going to use it as your marketing budget right now? Are you going to use it as your advertising budget right now? What does that mean when you set up those types of accounts? But I do see in the future that its legitimacy will be real.
And what have you done to inform yourself on it? Like, what have you like watched videos, read on it, or you're not too informed?
No, I mean, I think when you get down to the investment level, it's still the Wild West, even though Bitcoin's going over, 100,000 if you have one, is crazy. But I think from a marketing and a sponsorship perspective, highly involved, because just like the first .com era where you saw stadiums with, web companies all over them paying big money. We're in an era with Bitcoin and with cryptocurrency to where they want awareness. The Staples Center in LA moved to, crypto.com. And then you look over in Formula One and you see some of the big deals that are going on over there. I do think that spend is on the backside of it right now, at least in this 1.0 version. These big companies are stuck with their sponsorships for right now, but then I think there will be a 2.0 version, and you're going to see cryptocurrency moving in a more evolved level to where it's going to be more a part of your daily fan experience around sports.
When they say that about NFTs too, with like tickets and trading collectibles and that whole thing, which I'm sure you know all about.
Yeah, a huge part of it. And I think that, where we're going with the ticket business, the digital ticket business, and whether we're running monopolies in the ticket business, and some of the things that you're seeing in pricing, some of the things that you're seeing in entertainment and sports, and how these markets are moving, that's where I think in the legitimacy of this stuff, that maybe the next launch of NFTs and the next launch of how the ticket business is going to evolve will start moving into that direction better. I mean, honestly, most people and most clients I deal with in just downloading digital tickets is a huge anxiety for them. Huge anxiety. You know, every time, you go to the Final Four of the Super Bowl and it's showing up in digital tickets, it's easier to move around for sure. It's much more convenient, but because of all the different platforms and the phones and the whole thing, there's still generations that are nerve-wracked by this experience.
No, absolutely. John, last question before we end this one.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone who wants to live an extraordinary life?
You got to go for it. You gotta take advantage of being naive, because someday you're not going to be naive, and knowing too much is going to hold you back. You gotta prepare to win. So you definitely just don't jump off a cliff and expect to have a high probability of living. Most businesses are gone in 3 years. You guys know this. So it's very rare to get a business past 3 years. But if you can execute and you can use just sheer passion and you can get it over the line and you can run that past and you really believe in it, you're going to have something that's your own economy. You're going to control it and you're going to be super proud because it's yours.
Love it. Well,
Amazing.
John, it's been an amazing hour or so with you here.
Yeah.
And I look forward to doing this again.
I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it.
This is one for the history books. This is one we'll watch again for years and years to come. So, John.
Yeah, great questions. Great question. I hope I added a little bit of insight, but I really enjoyed it, guys.
John, we love you. We admire you. We thank you. And like I said, this will be on here forever. So God bless. And
you too. You guys are well on your way. I really thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure.
See you guys.
Love you guys. Peace out.